Davis greets listeners, invites them to share where they're listening from tonight. Mentions a story that began with a gifted pocket watch and ended with a missing heartbeat. Stay close, my friends, for tonight, time itself kept the secret. Early spring, St. Mary Mead wakes slow. Mist still clings to the hedges. The church bell tolls 8. Miss Marple sits by her window. The morning light falls on her table. She trims a handful of rosemary. The scissors click softly, steady as her breath. On the sill, a small cup of tea cools. Tick. From the corner shelf, her mantel clock gives a faint sound. Old, reliable, never wrong. She glances up. The pendulum swings like a calm heartbeat. Outside, footsteps crunch on gravel. The postman. Regular as sunrise. He slips something through the letterbox. A dull thud on the mat. Miss Marple rises. Her joints ache, but not enough to slow her. She lifts the parcel. Velvet-lined. Too heavy for a letter. No sender's mark. Her brow creases. Strange. She carries it to the table. The paper smells faintly of oil and brass. She unwraps it with care. Inside, an antique pocket watch. Gold case, scratched but elegant. On the back, engraved words. For Charles Ashby, eternal gratitude. Marple studies it. The hands are stopped at 12:01. She tilts it gently. No tick, just silence. Beneath the watch lies a folded letter. Thick paper, familiar handwriting. Sir Henry Clithering. She opens it. His tone as ever, polite but urgent. He asks for her presence in Ashby Village, 2 counties away. A man found dead in his own clock shop. No sign of struggle, no reason for fear. Yet something feels wrong, he writes. The coroner says heart failure, but the face, Jane the face, looked startled. She sets the letter down. Heart failure, startled face. A stopped watch. Her mind begins to turn. She looks again at the inscription. Charles Ashby. The name rings a faint bell. Perhaps mentioned once by Sir Henry, a clockmaker of fine reputation. A quiet man, precise, respected. She runs a finger over the cold metal. Eternal gratitude, she murmurs. Words of thanks, or guilt. Outside, the air stirs. The garden gate creaks. Sparrows flutter from the hedge. Marple looks up, thoughtful. Coincidence rarely knocks twice in her world. And a stopped clock is never only a clock. She folds the letter carefully, puts the watch into her knitting bag, then reaches for her coat. If Sir Henry writes, she goes. Always has. As she locks her door, the mantel clock ticks once, then falls silent again. Marple pauses, looks back at it. Her eyes narrow slightly. Sometimes, she whispers, the silence after a tick is more telling than the sound itself. Morning fog rolled low across the fields. The train hissed softly on the track. Miss Marple sat by the window, gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. Her knitting rested beside her, but her eyes stayed on the mist. The countryside passed in slow motion. Hedges, barns, bare trees, each blurred into pale grey. A quiet rhythm, like time holding its breath. The letter from Sir Henry lay open on her lap. She had read it twice, then once more. A clockmaker, dead beside his own creation. Heart failure, the coroner claimed, but not the face. The face had looked surprised. She tapped the envelope gently. Surprise, she whispered, a word that never belonged to death. The train slowed. Ashby Village. Small station, a single porter, and waiting near the gate, Sir Henry Clithering. He waved as she stepped down. Still tall, still kind-eyed. He took her suitcase at once. Jane, he greeted warmly. You look the same as ever. She smiled faintly. And you, Henry, still too polite for your own good. They walked through the thin fog. The road wound past cottages and bare hedgerows. Ashby seemed quiet. Too quiet. Even the blackbirds had fallen. Silent. Sir Henry spoke low. The victim was Mr. Percival Blythe, a clockmaker of fine reputation, known for his precision. His workshop stands by the village green. He was found there yesterday morning, alone. beside his newest clock. Marple listened, eyes ahead. Natural causes? So they say, he replied. But there's talk that his clock rang once, then stopped forever. He paused. Some say it was cursed. Marple's lips curved slightly. Curses are rarely mechanical, Henry, but they do tick. They turned the corner. Ahead stood a narrow shop with fogged windows. The sign above read, P. Blythe and Son, Horologists. A brass bell hung by the door, unmoving. Sir Henry pushed it open. The scent of oil and dust met them. Inside, shelves of clocks lined the walls. Tall clocks, travel clocks, pocket watches. All still, all silent. Marple stepped closer. Her shoes made no sound on the worn floorboards. She looked around slowly, eyes scanning the rows. So many faces, so many frozen moments. She reached toward a mantel clock. The hands stopped at 12:01. She moved to the next. Same time, then another, and another. Her gaze lifted toward Sir Henry, her voice quiet. Every pendulum, she said, had stopped at the same minute. Evening settled over Ashby Village. The fog had thinned, but the quiet stayed. Miss Marple arrived at Blythe Manor with Sir Henry. Warm lights glowed behind lace curtains. The house smelled faintly of polish and old wood. Lady Blythe greeted them herself, tall, elegant, in a dark gown. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured the sherry. "Forgive the informality," she said softly. "Since my husband's passing, the house feels strange without company." Marple nodded kindly. "A full table helps more than silence, my dear." The dining room gleamed. A long oak table, silver cutlery catching the firelight. Around it, the guests waited politely. Arthur, Blythe, the son, sat straight-backed, barely 30, eyes too cold for youth. Beside him, Clara Reed, the young apprentice, quiet, nervous. Her fingers traced the edge of her napkin again and again. Opposite them, the village doctor adjusted his cuffs. A practical man. Beside him, the vicar smiled with soft patience. He spoke of faith and duty. Lady Blythe smiled too often, and always too late. Dinner began. Soup first, then roasted chicken. Conversation stayed safe weather, parish matters, repairs to the clock shop. Arthur spoke little, Clara even less. Sir Henry carried most of the talk. Miss Marple observed in silence. Old habit. Her eyes moved from face to face, reading small things. Arthur's tense jaw, Clara's pale knuckles. Lady Blythe's glances short, sharp, controlled. Dessert arrived. Custard and fruit, carefully plated. Then it happened. From the far wall a faint sound. Tick, tick, tick. Everyone froze. The clock above the mantel had been broken for years. Lady Blythe's spoon slipped from her hand. Her voice trembled. "That clock hasn't worked since my husband died." Arthur stood abruptly. "It's nonsense," he said. Old wood, expanding. No one answered. The ticking grew louder, steady, measured, precise. Sir Henry rose, crossed the room, and lifted the clock from its hook. Inside, no key, no movement, no reason for sound. Yet, for one more second, the tick continued. Then silence. Lady Blythe pressed her hands together. Her knuckles whitened. "It does that sometimes," she whispered, "when the house is too quiet." The vicar murmured a prayer under his breath. Clara stared at her plate. Arthur poured himself another drink. Miss Marple watched them all, her eyes calm, her mind working. Then softly, almost to herself, she said, "It stopped again." But someone at the table kept counting. The manor slept in uneasy quiet. Wind brushed against the shutters. Somewhere a loose hinge creaked. Miss Marple sat in her guest room, awake. She never slept well in new houses. A clock ticked faintly on her bedside table. Each second felt heavy, stretched. Then a scream, high, sharp, cutting through the house like a blade. Then silence. Marple was already on her feet. Shawl, slippers, door open. Across the corridor another door slammed. Sir Henry appeared from his room, coat half on. He didn't ask. He just said, "Workshop." They moved fast down the stairs. The hallway lamps flickered weakly. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust. Ahead, the workshop door stood ajar. Inside, chaos. Drawers open. Tools scattered across the floor. A chair overturned. The smell of metal hung thick in the air. On the workbench, a smashed watch lay open. Its face cracked, hands twisted. The glass sparkled under the gaslight. Marple stopped just inside the doorway. Her eyes swept the room once. Once was enough. Arthur stood near the bench, white as paper, one hand gripping the table for balance. The other held a handkerchief, stained at the edge. Sir Henry stepped forward. "Arthur, what happened?" Arthur tried to speak, but his breath came short. "I heard something," he stammered. "A noise from here. I came down. The door was open." His voice trembled. He looked toward the floor, then quickly away. Marple's tone stayed calm. "Where is your mother?" "In her room," Arthur said. "Clara too. They're asleep." He looked unsure as he said it. The vicar's house stood across the lane. He would not have heard. Only those inside the manor would. Sir Henry moved to check the back door. Locked. The windows too. Nothing disturbed from outside. Marple crouched slowly by the broken watch. She didn't touch it. She only looked. The casing was fine gold. No dust on it. Too clean. Then something caught her eye. A glint near the baseboard. She leaned closer. A dark spot on the wood. Still wet. Fresh. Her gaze lifted toward Arthur. His handkerchief trembled. His lips moved, but no words came. Sir Henry followed her line of sight. "What is it, Jane?" Marple spoke softly, almost to herself. "On the floor," she said, lay a man's pocket watch and a drop of blood. By morning, the manor was no longer quiet. A motor car rumbled up the gravel path. Inspector Graves stepped out. Broad shoulders, grey coat, tired eyes. He had seen too many tidy murders disguised as accidents. Miss Marple met him at the door. She offered tea first. He declined politely. "Let's begin, madam," he said. And so they did. The workshop looked different by daylight. Neater, yet colder. Someone had swept the floor, though not well. The air still smelled faintly of brass and polish. Arthur stood near the window, pale but rigid. Clara sat in the corner, twisting her gloves. Two servants waited by the door, eyes down, afraid to speak. Inspector Graves took notes with short strokes. "When was the last time you saw the room undisturbed?" he asked. Arthur hesitated. "Before supper," he said. "Everything was in order then." The inspector nodded once. "And you, Miss Reed?" Clara looked up quickly. "After dinner. I came to fetch my notebook. The door was closed. I didn't go in." Her voice was steady but thin. Graves turned to the maids. "Who locks the back door at night?" The older one answered. "I do, sir. Always before 9. And last night?" "I did, sir." He jotted that down. "No forced entry," he murmured. "No theft either." Curious. He crouched beside the workbench, examined the shattered watch, the scattered tools, the faint dark mark where the drop had fallen. "The blood," he said softly, "is not much." "Enough," Marple replied, watching him. He glanced at her, half smiling. "You never miss, do you, Miss Marple?" She said nothing. He rose. "Nothing taken, no sign of break-in, yet the watch is smashed deliberately. Not by a fall, by intent." Marple moved closer to the fireplace. Her eyes traced the edges of the iron grate. The soot was disturbed only in one place. She bent, took her knitting needle from her pocket, and brushed the ash gently aside. A small cloud rose, grey and thin, beneath it fine powder. Not soot, lighter, shimmering faintly. "Clock dust," she murmured. The inspector frowned. "From polishing?" "No, from cutting." She pointed to the mark near the base of the grate. "Someone opened something metal here, recently." She pressed the needle deeper into the ash. It clicked, a sound small but certain. She turned the tool slightly and something shifted beneath. Graves crouched beside her. Together they lifted a small square tile from the hearth floor. Beneath it, wrapped in grey cloth, lay a single brass key. Graves whistled low. "No safe in the house," he said. Marple's eyes stayed on the key. Her tone remained calm, but her words landed hard. "Not a safe," she said softly. "A lock. A clock lock." Graves looked puzzled. She folded the cloth again, her voice almost a whisper now. "Someone had hidden a key," she said, "where no clock should ever burn." Afternoon light filtered through the workshop windows. Dust drifted in slow motion, soft and weightless. The smell of brass still lingered. Miss Marple stood quietly by the door. Clara Reed sat at the workbench, shoulders drawn tight. Her apron was still on. Her fingers rested over a pile of broken cogs, but she wasn't working. She was waiting. Marple closed the door behind her. "May I?" she asked gently. Clara nodded. No words, only a small gesture toward the stool beside her. Marple Saturday. The silence held for a moment, a long one. Then Clara spoke, voice low, brittle. "I didn't sleep last night," she said. Her eyes stayed on the metal, pieces in front of her. They kept ticking in my head, even when they shouldn't. Marple folded her hands. "The clocks?" Clara gave a small nod. "Every one of them. I could hear them in the dark." She paused, then added quietly, "He used to say a stopped clock tells more truth than a running one." Marple's brow softened. "You mean Mr. Blythe?" "Yes." Her lips trembled slightly. "He was kind, too kind for the people he worked for." Marple waited. Let the girl fill the silence. Clara drew a breath. There was something he discovered, something he shouldn't have. Her voice shook. "A man, one of his clients, paid him to adjust clocks, not for repairs, for records." Marple tilted her head. "Records?" "Alibis," Clara whispered. "For trains, for meetings, for time stamps that never happened. He'd change the mechanism, make it seem as though someone was elsewhere when they weren't." Her hands gripped the edge of the table. But Mr. Blythe stopped it. Said he couldn't be part of lies anymore. He said he'd tell the police if it happened again. Marple's gaze moved to the shelf of half-finished clocks, all silent now, each one perhaps a story, each one touched by guilt. "And he told someone else, didn't he?" she asked softly. Clara looked away. Her throat worked before the words came. "He told Arthur," she said. "He trusted him." Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "Arthur? His friend?" Clara hesitated. "His rival," she whispered. "Mr. Blythe said Arthur had changed lately. Too eager for money, too willing to please his mother." Marple leaned forward. "Lady Blythe?" Clara's silence was answer enough. Her hands began to tremble again. "I loved him," she said suddenly. "Arthur. I still do. But his mother, she frightens me. She watches every word I say, every place I go." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Marple reached out, touched her hand lightly. Her voice was calm, but edged with quiet truth. "Love often hides guilt, my dear," she said softly. Then her eyes met Clara's. But whose? Ashby Church stood grey against the rain. The bell tower loomed above the square. Each toll fell slow, measured, like the heartbeat of the dead. Umbrellas lined the path to the churchyard. Faces half hidden, hats low. No one spoke louder than a whisper. Miss Marple stood near the back, Sir Henry beside her, both silent beneath the drizzle. The smell of wet earth rose from the graves. Cold, familiar. The coffin waited before the altar. Dark oak, brass handles, a craftsman's box for a craftsman's rest. On its lid a small silver clock key. No inscription, no motion. Lady Blythe sat in the first pew, pale, still. Arthur on one side, Clara on the other. Her gloved hands gripped a handkerchief that had no tears on it. The vicar's voice wove through the damp air. He spoke of time, of labor, of faith. "Every man," he said softly, "builds his measure of eternity." Heads bowed. The choir hummed a low hymn. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Drops tapped on stone like small hammers. As the service ended, the pallbearers lifted the coffin. It moved slow down the aisle. The church door opened to grey light. The procession wound into the churchyard. Morning coats brushed the wet grass. A single clock in the bell tower struck 12. The sound echoed through the mist, deep, hollow, final. Lady Blythe faltered as the coffin was lowered. Her breath caught. Her body swayed. Arthur caught her arm, steadying her. "She'll be all right," he murmured. But she wasn't. Her face had gone white as the stone itself. Marple watched her carefully. Too much faintness for too little grief. A performance, perhaps. Or fear. The vicar leaned closer to Sir Henry as the last words were said, his tone barely a whisper. "Mr. Blythe spoke before. He passed," he said. Just 3 words. Marple turned her head slightly. "What words, Reverend?" The vicar swallowed. He said, "Stop the second hand." No one replied. The rain answered for them. Steady. Relentless. Arthur cleared his throat, forcing composure. "My father was poetic," he muttered, even at the end. No one corrected him. Clara stood apart, her eyes fixed on the grave. Her lips moved silently. A prayer or a memory, no one could tell. The coffin sank out of sight. Soil hit the lid with dull, final rhythm. Marple's gaze followed each falling clump. She noticed small things. A gear-shaped brooch on Lady Blythe's collar, a ring on Arthur's hand that hadn't been there yesterday. Sir Henry looked at her. Her face gave nothing away, but her eyes were alive with thought. "To halt a clock is simple," she murmured. "To halt a secret, never." The next morning, the rain had stopped. Ashby Village looked washed clean, yet no one smiled. Shutters stayed half-closed. People spoke softly, as if the air still remembered the funeral. Miss Marple walked alone to the clock shop. The street was empty. Only the faint smell of oil drifted from the workshop chimney. She paused by the locked door. A small notice hung crookedly, closed until further notice. She removed her glove and tried the handle. It turned, unlocked. Inside, the air felt heavier than before. Dust had settled overnight, soft and even. Every clock in the room still frozen at 12:01. She listened. Nothing. Even silence had weight here. She began to move slowly, her steps careful on the wooden floor. Her eyes followed the workbench, the drawers, the shelves. Nothing stolen. Everything placed too neatly, as if tidied after panic. She bent to look beneath the bench. A scrap of parchment, half torn, caught her eye. She pulled it out. Numbers, columns, a list of dates, payments recorded with precision. A ledger, page but incomplete. Her mind clicked once, like the sound of a winding key. She began to search for the rest. One drawer after another, tools, wax, spare screws, nothing. Then her heel tapped something hollow. A different tone, wood above wood. She crouched, pressed her palm flat to the floorboards. One plank shifted slightly under pressure, loose. She used her knitting needle again, her quiet detective's companion. Slipped it into the seam and lifted. A panel came free with a soft creak. Beneath it, wrapped in thin paper, lay a small book. Old. Edges darkened by oil and time, she carried it to the table and opened the cover, a ledger the missing record. Each page filled with neat handwriting, dates, times, initials, payments. Her finger traced down the column. CS repair minor, DL restoration paid in full, MV consultation. Then one name appeared again and again, AR, always with larger sums, always late at night. One entry stood out, the final one, underlined twice in heavy pencil, ARR midnight contract. No description, no payment recorded. Just the note and a circle drawn around it in red ink. Marple closed the book slowly. Her eyes lingered on the initials. A.R. Arthur Reed, or Arthur Blythe. Both fit. Both had reason. Both had lied. She slipped the ledger into her bag and replaced the plank carefully. The sound of the closing board echoed faintly, like a muted chime. As she turned to leave, a draft stirred one of the wall clocks. Its pendulum moved once, then stilled again, frozen mid-swing. Marple looked back, voice low and certain. A.R. Arthur Reed or Arthur Blythe both wore the same initials. The afternoon passed under a pale Sunday. The manor sat quiet again, too quiet. Miss Marple was shown into the drawing room. Polished furniture, closed curtains, everything in order, yet nothing felt at peace. Lady Blythe sat by the window, black dress, pearl brooch, her hair pinned without fault. She smiled faintly when Marple entered. A smile rehearsed, not real. "Miss Marple," she said softly, "how kind of you to visit. I do hope this dreadful business hasn't disturbed your rest." Marple removed her gloves. "I seldom rest when things don't add up," she said. Her tone was calm, gentle enough to sound harmless. Lady Blythe poured tea with measured grace. The porcelain clicked faintly against the saucer. "People talk, Miss Marple," she continued. "Small towns thrive on gossip. I've learned to let the noise pass." Marple stirred her tea once. "Then you've heard the stories?" "I've heard enough," Lady Blythe replied. "They whisper that my husband's death was unnatural, that he kept secrets, that he was afraid." She gave a delicate laugh. "Ridiculous, of course. He was a man of clocks, not conspiracies." Marple smiled. "But men of clocks often measure more than hours." The air grew still. Lady Blythe's fingers froze around her cup. Outside, the stable clock began to chime. A low, uneven sound. Wrong time. 4 chimes instead of 3. The sound slipped through the window pane. Lady Blythe flinched before she could stop herself. Her cup rattled against the saucer. Tea spilled over the rim, dark and slow. Marple noticed. She noticed everything, but she said nothing. She only reached for the napkin and passed it gently across. "Strange," she murmured. "Your late husband was known for precision." Lady Blythe dabbed at the spill. Her composure returned like a mask fitted back in place. "Old metal," she said quietly. "It slips with age. Even the best clock forgets its purpose when the maker is gone." Marple looked around the room. Every clock on the wall was stopped. Everyone, except the one outside. "You kept them all?" she asked. "They were his life's work," Lady Blythe said. "Every piece, a memory." Her hand lifted, slightly, adjusting her ring. Gold, set with a small carved symbol, not a jewel, a shape, a gear, small, perfectly cut. Marple's eyes followed the motion. Her voice dropped. "I hadn't noticed that before." Lady Blythe smiled again, but her eyes didn't. "A memento," she said softly, "of my husband's craft." Marple took a slow sip of her tea. Her tone was light, but her meaning sharp. "How fitting," she said. Then she rose, gathering her gloves. Her gaze lingered on the ring once more, gleaming faintly in the grey light. "The widow of a clockmaker," she said quietly, wearing his signature seal of trade. The morning light crept over the village roofs, cold, clear. Miss Marple returned to the clock shop with Inspector Graves. The key from the hearth still weighed in her pocket. It had not belonged to any door. Inside, the air was still stale. Clocks lined the walls like frozen eyes, each one silent, each one holding its own secret. Marple pointed toward the back wall. "Inspector, the mirror," she said. He looked at her, puzzled. "The one above the workbench?" "Yes. It faces the clocks. I believe it holds more truth than glass." He nodded, motioned to the constable. "Polish it clean. No smudges left behind." The young officer fetched a cloth and a bottle of spirits. He wiped carefully. Once, twice, then paused. "Something's here," he murmured. He stepped aside. Under the fresh light, faint ridges appeared, a set of fingerprints partial but clear, thin, narrow, too small for a man's. Graves bent close. He frowned. "Not Arthur's. His prints are broader. This hand is right, dominant, judging by the pressure lines." Marple nodded. "The glass remembers," she said softly, "even when people don't." The inspector straightened. "You think she was here? The mother?" Marple didn't answer directly. She studied the dust on the frame. One section wiped, clean, the rest untouched. She leaned forward. Marple said, "Not to fix her hair, to check something behind her, something on the workbench." Graves crossed his arms. The woman said she never entered the shop after her husband's death. She did, Marple replied quietly. Maybe not to grieve. Maybe to be sure what he left behind was gone. The constable lifted the mirror from the wall, holding it toward the light. The fingerprints shone faintly through a film of oil and dust. They formed an arc, a half-turn of a hand, as if she had grasped the edge in haste. Marple looked closer. The print's outline met a faint smear of brass powder near the bottom edge. Clock dust again. "See here," she said. She had oil on her fingers. "That means she touched tools or tried to remove them." "Not a guest's mistake, Inspector. A worker's action." Graves sighed. "Lady Blythe wouldn't touch a screwdriver if her life depended on it." Marple's gaze stayed fixed on the glass. "She already has," she said. "She lived beside one for 20 years. The inspector rubbed his jaw uneasy. "You'll have me suspecting her next, Miss Marple." Marple's tone was almost kind. "Don't suspect, Inspector. Observe. The truth's already in the reflection." He followed her eyes back to the prints, faint but undeniable. The hand of a woman, right-handed. Pressed where none should have been. Marple's voice dropped to a whisper. "Only one woman handled the clocks that night," she said, and she swore she never entered. The afternoon passed in a hush. Ashby's air felt heavier than fog. Miss Marple and Sir Henry sat in the manor's small study. A low fire burned. No clock ticked. Not one. Sir Henry leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He looked thoughtful, uneasy. "Jane," he said slowly, "there's something I didn't mention before." Marple didn't move. She waited. He had that. Look the kind that preceded sense. "At the funeral," he continued, "I noticed something odd. Clara Reed. Her glove." He paused. "Torn at the wrist. The right one." Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "Torn?" "Yes," he said. "A small rip, just below the thumb, looked fresh. She tried to hide it, but I saw the thread hanging loose." Marple nodded once, thoughtful. "She's right-handed," she murmured. The fingerprints on the mirror were right-handed too. Sir Henry frowned. "You think it was her?" "I think she was in the workshop that night," Marple replied. "But that doesn't make her a killer." He leaned back, unsatisfied. "Then why lie about it?" Marple looked toward the window. Rain began to patter again, soft and even. "She may fear someone more than she fears the truth," she said quietly. "Fear leaves sharper marks than guilt, Henry." He sighed. "Perhaps, but that girl knows something." Marple rose from her chair. She crossed to the small table near the fire. From her bag, she took out the broken pocket watch, the one from the workshop floor. The gold case was cracked, the face shattered, but it still carried the faint warmth of use. "I've been meaning to look inside," she said. With a small pin, she lifted the back cover. The hinge creaked faintly. Inside, tucked behind the movement, a tiny locket plate. She eased it free. Sir Henry leaned closer. A small photograph rested beneath the glass. A boy, no more than 8. Serious face. Dark hair. Underneath, in faded ink, Edward Blythe, 1881. Sir Henry blinked. "Edward Blythe." Marple nodded. "The name doesn't appear in the family record." He straightened. "Arthur was their only child." "Was he?" Marple asked softly. Her gaze stayed on the picture. "The boy in this photo would have been born long before Arthur, before Lady Blythe married Mr. Blythe at all." Sir Henry looked puzzled. "You mean?" Marple closed the case carefully. "Perhaps not all of this family was born within it," she said. "Some histories are written in silence, Henry, others in names that disappear." He studied her face. "You think this child mattered?" Marple met his eyes. "Every lie begins with something true," she said quietly. "Even the old ones." She slipped the broken watch back into her bag. The faintest smell of brass lingered. Then, softly, she added, "A lie older than the clock itself." Evening shadows stretched long across the manor floor. The lamps had not yet been lit. Miss Marple sat alone in the small library. Paper, ink, silence. She had asked for privacy. Sir Henry waited in the next room. Inspector Graves had gone to the village office to collect old files. Something had begun to form in her mind. Something cold, steady, and exact. The butler entered quietly. He placed a sealed envelope on the desk. "From the solicitor, madam," he said. "Lady Blythe's lawyer sent it this morning." Marple thanked him and waited until the door closed. Then she broke the seal. Inside the late Mr. Blythe's will, she read in silence, line by line. Most of it was ordinary. A house, a workshop, the estate divided between wife and son. Then she reached the final clause, a handwritten note added by Mr. Blythe himself. The words were faint but legible. "To the true heir of time I leave the master key and the property attached. They shall know themselves when the pendulum strikes 12. Marple read it twice, then again. Her lips pressed together. Not the son, not Arthur Blythe, the heir of time. A quiet knock interrupted her. Clara Reed stepped in. Her hand still carried faint traces of polish. Eyes red from sleeplessness. "You wish to see me, Miss Marple?" "Yes, my dear," Marple said. "Come sit. There's something you should hear." She passed the girl, the will. Clara's eyes scanned the words slowly. She frowned. "I don't understand," she whispered. "He meant Arthur, surely." Marple shook her head. "No, he meant you." Clara looked up sharply. "Me?" "Yes," Marple said softly. "You are Lady Blythe's child, not Arthur. Born before her marriage. Given away. Your mother hid it well." Clara's mouth parted, but no sound came. "I can't. I don't," Marple continued gently. "She brought you back years later, under a new name. Made you her husband's apprentice. A convenient way to watch her secret without ever speaking it." Clara's hands trembled. "She told me nothing." "She wouldn't," Marple said. "She built her life on silence. But your eyes, your handwriting, even your temper, they're his. Mr. Blythe knew long before she confessed it." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "He knew?" "Yes, and he changed his will for you." Clara covered her mouth. Her shoulders shook. All those years of distance, suddenly explained. Marple closed the folder slowly. "Arthur," she said, "was never her son by blood. He was adopted later when guilt needed form." The truth hung in the room like smoke. Outside, the wind stirred the branches against the window pane. A sound like a ticking clock. One beat. Then silence. Miss Marple looked toward it, voice low. "The pendulum swung once," she said, "and everything turned upside down." Night fell early over Ashby. The village slept uneasy. A thin moon hung above the churchyard like a watch face without hands. Inspector Graves waited by the gate, lantern in hand. Miss Marple joined him, shawl tight around her shoulders. Her eyes carried purpose, not fear. The air was damp, still, and cold. They crossed the gravel path between the graves. The sound of their steps echoed faintly. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called once, then stopped. Graves muttered, "You're certain of this, Miss Marple?" She nodded. "Quite certain, Inspector. He left something unfinished, and a man like Percival Blythe never leaves his work incomplete." The lantern light swayed as they moved through the fog. Marble stones gleamed briefly, then vanished again. At the far end stood the Blythe mausoleum, grey, square, and silent. Its iron gate was chained but old. Graves bent to the lock. "Rusty," he said. He twisted the latch until it gave with a dull snap. The gate creaked open. They stepped inside. The smell of dust and iron filled the space. The lantern's glow brushed faint shapes on the wall, carved gears, circles, numbers. Mr. Blythe had even decorated his resting place with his craft. At the center stood the tomb itself. Stone lid, smooth surface. A small bronze clock face mounted into the front. Its hands frozen at 12:01. Graves exhaled. "Same time again." Marple raised a hand. "Listen." He did. At first, nothing. Then faintly a sound. Tick, tick, tick. Graves frowned. "It's moving." Marple leaned closer, her ear almost against the cold stone. The ticking came from inside the tomb. Faint, mechanical, alive. She traced the bronze face with her fingers, then pressed the edge. It shifted slightly under her touch. "There's a compartment," she murmured. "Help me lift this panel." Together they eased the clock face forward. Behind it, narrow gears turned slowly. A single mechanism, wound by hidden motion. Graves stared. Good Lord. He built a working clock into his own grave. Marple's eyes didn't leave the moving cogs. "Not just a clock," she said. "A message." Something glinted between the gears. She reached in carefully, her fingers steady. A small brass object lay wedged inside. She pulled it free, the missing key. The one from the ledger note. The master key. Graves held the lantern higher. The gears turned once more, then stopped. A low click echoed through the lysand. Tomb. Like a sigh. Marple looked at the key in her hand. It was engraved with a single word. Truth. She closed her fingers around it. "Even the dead," she whispered, "can keep time with honesty." Graves looked uneasy. "What does it open, Miss Marple?" She glanced at him, eyes calm, voice almost reverent. "He built his confession," she said, "into the very clock that marked his grave." Morning broke pale and colourless. Ashby village held its breath. The manor gates stood open. Inside, the old clock shop waited silent, ready. Inspector Graves stood by the workbench. Sir Henry near the door. Arthur Blythe leaned against the wall, jaw set. Clara sat apart, eyes lowered. And Lady Blythe, composed as always, sat in her late husband's chair. Miss Marple entered last. Her steps were unhurried. She carried something wrapped in a linen cloth. The brass key. She placed it gently on the workbench, her voice calm. "Mr. Blythe left his final truth in motion, Inspector. It is time we let it speak." Graves nodded. Everyone watched as Marple set down the grave clock mechanism, taken from the tomb. Small, heavy. Its gears faintly tarnished, but intact. The silence grew thick. Only the faint creak of the floorboards answered. Marple inserted the brass key into the base. It fit perfectly. She turned it once. A click, then a slow hum. The gears began to move. The clock hands trembled, and from within came a faint metallic voice. Recorded, hollow, but clear enough to chill the air. "To the one who betrayed my son." Lady Blythe's cup fell from her hand. It shattered. No one spoke. The voice continued. "You took what was mine. You took what was his. You wore my name and sold my truth. But time remembers. Time keeps witness." Arthur straightened. "Father?" he whispered. The sound cracked. "To the one who lied about blood and name," the voice went on, "I leave not forgiveness, but record. My clocks will stop where deceit begins." Marple watched Lady Blythe carefully. Her breathing had changed, shallow, uneven. Her fingers clutched her ring, twisting it round and round. Clara looked from one to the other, confusion growing into fear. "What does he mean?" she whispered. Marple's voice was steady. "He means he knew. About the child. About the false inheritance. About you, Lady Blythe, hiding the truth and shaping two lives around it." Lady Blythe's head lifted sharply. "You dare accuse me." But her voice faltered. The recording spoke again. "You feared time would expose you, but you forgot, my dear, time is mine." Then silence. The gears slowed. The ticking faded. Graves stepped forward. "Lady Blythe," he said quietly, "do you wish to answer that?" She tried to speak. No words came. Her hand trembled. Her lips parted, but only a soundless breath escaped. Arthur's face hardened. Clara's eyes filled with tears. The truth sat heavy between them. Marple reached out and stopped the clock. The final tick echoed through the room like a closing door. And in that stillness, she thought, the sound of Lady Blythe's silence was louder than any chime. No one moved. The workshop felt smaller now. Air heavy, light dim. Even the clocks on the walls seemed to lean closer, waiting. Lady Blythe sat rigid in her chair. The broken cup still lay at her feet. Her hands trembled, resting on her lap like empty things. Sir Henry stood behind her. Inspector Graves waited, and Miss Marple, calm, composed, watched without a word. It was Lady Blythe who broke the silence. Her voice cracked at the edges. "Do you think I meant to kill him?" No one answered. She gave a sharp, bitter laugh. "He left me no choice." Marple's tone stayed soft. People often believe that when guilt begins to speak. Lady Blythe's eyes flashed, then dulled again. She looked down at her shaking hands. "He knew," she said. "Percival always knew." She leaned forward, the words tumbling fast now, as if time itself had loosened her tongue. "He found the papers, the adoption, the old letters I burned. He told me he was going to tell everyone. Said the workshop would go to her." Her gaze flicked toward Clara. "She didn't even know, but he wanted the truth out." Arthur shifted. His face went pale. "You lied to me all my life," he whispered. "You made me believe I was his son." Lady Blythe turned toward him. Pain crossed her features, brief and honest. "I did it to protect you," she said. "I couldn't lose everything. Not again. Not after Edward." Marple's eyes narrowed. "Edward Blythe," she said quietly. "The first child." Lady Blythe nodded once. A tear slipped down her cheek. "He died before I married Percival. A fever. He was 8. I told everyone I was never a mother." Her breath hitched. But Percival never forgot. He made that clock for him, the first one that rang and stopped. He said time should pause for innocence. Her hands clenched tight. When he found my secret with Clara, he said I'd stolen time itself. She looked up, wild and broken. "Do you know what that does to a woman?" Marple said nothing, only watched, listened. "I put something in his tea," Lady Blythe whispered. "Not enough to kill him, only to quiet him. But when he accused me, when he called me a murderer for Edward's death..." She stopped, shaking. "I struck him. The cup fell. He didn't move again." The room went still. Even the dust seemed to hang, suspended. Inspector Graves lowered his pen. Sir Henry closed his eyes briefly. Arthur turned away. Clara wept quietly, one hand covering her mouth. Lady Blythe looked down at her ring, the small gear shining faintly. "He built time," she said softly, "and I broke it." Marple's voice came gentle, final. "No, my dear, you only stopped it." Lady Blythe lifted her eyes, hollow and far away, and Miss Marple finished, low and clear. "Time stopped because guilt did." Evening rain whispered against the windows of St. Mary Mead. The village lay quiet again. No fog, no whispers of death, only the soft comfort of routine returning. Miss Marple sat by the fire. A single lamp glowed beside her chair. The steam from her teacup curled upward, slow and steady. Her knitting lay untouched. She wasn't thinking of stitches tonight. On the small table near her sat the pocket watch, the one from Ashby. The gold dull now, but whole, its face repaired, its hands reset. She lifted it carefully, listened. One faint tick. Then silence. Her eyes softened. So many clocks. So many secrets. Yet every story ended the same way when truth finally spoke. Everything else went still. She remembered Lady Blythe's last words in the carriage. No anger, no denial. Only the emptiness of someone who had run out of lies to live inside. Marple set the watch gently on the shelf above the fire. Beside it, the small jar of dried rosemary she had cut that morning, the morning before all began. It smelled faintly of calm days and clear conscience. The fire popped softly, rain pattered steady. Somewhere, the church clock chimed 9. Each sound, honest, each second earned. She smiled faintly. It was not joy, not sorrow. Something between. The quiet satisfaction of knowing time had been set right again. She reached for her tea. The cup was warm, the world outside patient once more. In the stillness, she spoke to no one in particular, just to the ticking that wasn't there. "Truth," she murmured, "like time, cannot be wound backward." Then she sat back, eyes half closed, and listen to the sound of rain. My friends, thank you for sharing tonight's mystery. The faint sound of rain continues beneath his words. Tell us, where should Miss Marple travel next? To the seaside or to the city? You can share your thoughts below, your guesses, your theories, your favorite moment. He lets the silence linger just long enough. Each story begins the same way, he continues, with a whisper and a cup of tea that grows cold before the truth does. Stay curious, my friends, and remember, another kettle will boil tomorrow, and another secret will stir.